It's really crazy just how much the battlefield of this election seems to change just about every week or so, and that really speaks to just how dynamic this election is going to be. You have so many factors in play. I mean, heck, just even looking at RFK's election map, previously he wasn't on the ballot in Kentucky, but now that he's suspended his election in the swing states, he's on the ballot in Kentucky again. He might end up on the ballot in New York. He is petitioning against that. It's a very complex situation right now. Kennedy is officially off the ballot in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Maine, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. However, there are 3 states as of right now that he cannot get off. Kennedy will be on the ballot in Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina. All 3 of those are going to be major swing states that could go either way. And if Kennedy's endorsement of Trump isn't enough to swing his supporters toward Trump, it's possible him being on the ballot will swing these states over to Kamala's side. That being said, Kamala Harris does have some challenges of her own, facing up against Jill Stein and possibly Cornel West in the states of Wisconsin and Michigan. And very fortunately for Trump and Kennedy is that Cornel West and Jill Stein are already on the ballot in North Carolina and Georgia, likely chipping away at Kamala Harris's support in these states. That being said, Trump will still have to deal with the Libertarian Party, which has a presence in just about every single state, and will chip away a small portion of the vote from his support base. However, it's quite possible that Trump might have just countered the Libertarian Party by getting an endorsement from Tulsi Gabbard, or Gabbard, however you pronounce it. I've said it before and I'll say it again, things look very good for Trump and they keep looking better and better for him. Initially, at the beginning of this election cycle, I was extremely skeptical of how he was taking things. I was concerned that he wasn't going to be able to muster anywhere near the support he had pulled in the previous elections, but he was able to turn that around pretty quickly. I had been saying for the longest time, RFK is a major concern because many people on the right seem to think that he was going to pull more from the Democrats than he would from Trump, and that, he's just a far-left Democrat, of course he's going to pull more from them. No, he stands on many of the same policies that Trump stands on. Him being on the ballot is a threat to Trump. Now that they've essentially formed something of a coalition, Trump has neutralized that threat and has brought his supporters, he's brought along maybe even a good number of Democrats to his side of the aisle. What really matters is those independents and those more socially conservative but maybe labor-oriented Democrats that both Trump and RFK would appeal to. And Trump has really doubled down, or I should say consolidated, this coalition government, this almost anti-establishment government, by also getting an endorsement from Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, of course, is a Democrat from Hawaii. She ran a presidential campaign back in 2020, and she is sort of unique as a politician, but where she aligns, I would say, is probably a lot more with the libertarians than anybody else. She has a very anti-war stance. She opposes the war on drugs. She's even talked about legalizing several drugs as well. Where she would clash with the libertarians is probably her position on, if memory serves, she wanted to have universal health care or something of that sort. This wouldn't be too out of the realm of policy for Trump. Trump is definitely willing to use government power to provide for the American public. However, Trump has always neglected healthcare policy. He's never really had a solid position for what he wants to do with healthcare, but now having RFK Jr. and Tulsi on his side, he might be able to craft a genuinely strong healthcare policy that can challenge anything that Kamala Harris could put out. Now, hand in hand with this has also been sort of appeals Trump has been trying to make to the pro-choice movement. Now, of course, Trump, and rather much of his base, I should say, is very pro-life, so this approach is sort of seen as a compromise. Some people who are very dedicated to that cause and that policy might be turned off by this, but what's important to note is that Trump's position hasn't changed too much. A lot of this goes down to what really was Roe v. Wade. It was returning the authority over matters like abortion back to the states, and that so much hasn't changed too much. Trump's position now seems to be more explicitly that he's willing to accept birth control wherever it might exist in more liberal states and the states that seem to accept it, whereas for conservative states, of course, he's going to allow them to have the policy they want to have in those states. Now, of course, this compromise position is something of an effort to appeal to the female vote, And of course, it's understandable why he would be trying to do this. Kamala Harris is, of course, campaigning very hard for that female vote, and she's likely to get a good chunk of it. But what Trump is probably trying to do is maintain his hold over a slice of the moderate population there. This has sort of gone hand in hand with Trump and Tulsi both coming out in favor of in vitro fertilization, which has been another issue of contention between Trump and the pro-life movement. But on the part of Trump, it's certainly coming from a position of natalism, where he does want to encourage more family building, having more children for those people who might not be able to conceive naturally. On the part of Tulsi, of course, this is something that she can empathize with very closely. She, of course, had tried it, but she wasn't successful, and this policy point might be used to appeal to more of that demographic of women who do want to have children, who are concerned about their ability to conceive, who might not be able to afford the process. But now this is seen as something of an issue by the pro-life movement, who see in vitro fertilization as an unnatural interference with the reproductive process. Frankly, it's an especially complicated issue for Republicans, specifically because many religious denominations, many churches, do expressly condemn artificial insemination. However, on the flip side of that, IVF also goes hand in hand with natalism, which the Republicans have been pushing for. They've been pushing for, being able to have families, making family raising all the easier. So it's almost a paradoxical issue where people do want to make having a family easier, but at the same time, their religious orientation might condemn this particular form of conception. It's definitely a tricky issue for Republicans to grapple with. It's something that's going to have to be figured out as time goes on. It's kind of... this is one of those difficult factors to work with, because this is an election cycle, and it's arguably somewhat risky for Trump to be pulling this right now, because it could cost him support from a lot of the pro-life movement. There's come to develop this sense that a lot of people in the pro-life movement are single-issue voters, or were single-issue voters, and once Roe v. Wade was overturned, many of these same people didn't turn out to vote in the 2022 midterms, which cost the Republican Party significantly and sort of shot the movement in its own foot. Because, well, what wound up happening, you'd bring back the matter of birth control to the states, you don't turn out for the midterms, more liberal politicians get in power, and now at the state level, they push to enshrine protections for birth control, for abortions, and the state ends up, becoming a lot more pro-choice than it was previously. It'll be interesting to see how this particular policy approach affects Trump and his campaign. Frankly, that base should want to continue supporting him because, well, if he loses, they're going to be hit with a much more pro-choice administration. There might be opposition to Trump embracing this particular policy point, but generally speaking, Trump is going to be a much more pro-life president than Kamala Harris is. Through a matter of inaction, a lot of these pro-lifers who might say, well, I'm not going to vote for Trump because he's taken this position, they're going to put themselves in the same situation they were back in 2022, where, alright, so you got a moral victory in overturning Roe v. Wade, but because you don't come out to vote in 2022 because you think you've gotten everything you wanted, okay, now your state is more pro-choice than it ever was despite you overturning Roe v. Wade. You might say, well, I've won a moral victory by opposing Trump and sending a message to the Republican Party that, oh, well, I'm not going to support anything that violates pro-life values. Okay, well, now you've gotten a Democrat in charge, and the Democrat is going to push for even more pro-choice policy than ever before. The Overton window shifts to the left, and by, 2028, 2032, you have the Republican president talking about how pro-choice policy is a fundamental right for every American. Okay, the pro-life movement just keeps shooting itself in the foot, and eventually it's going to drive itself into extinction. And compromises like this, they should be expected from this coalition government that Trump is essentially pulling together. Now that you do have RFK in the fold, now that you have Tulsi Gabbard in the fold, this is going to be about challenging the establishment that has been in power for decades by this point, and that has not worked. It's almost a referendum on, do you want actual change? Do you want a new future for the country? or do you want to continue down the cycle, this neoliberal, neoconservative cycle that's gone on for decades, that's gotten us in more foreign wars, that has driven us deeper in debt? Do you want more of the same, or do you want to try something new? That status quo is, of course, a neoliberal, neoconservative establishment where we do have foreign intervention to maintain a essential global American empire. It's about promoting globalism, it's about promoting free trade, it's about promoting this democratic American world order. The opposition that has risen up to that, this coalition government that Trump is trying to establish right now, is based in focusing on America first, domestic issues. It's about winding back the foreign wars. This marks a very, very distinct realignment in American politics. If you've been with the channel for a while, you of course know my perspective on American history is that you've had 7 ages where you've essentially had a major ideology or political faction that dominates government for a period of time, and the neoliberal, neoconservative establishment is reaching its terminus. This faction is losing popularity across America, whether you're talking about on the left or on the right. And you can have 2 outcomes from this. You can have a natural evolution of that ideology toward its next step, which would be whatever Kamala Harris and her successors have to offer, or it can be a complete pivot to a new mindset. Given the track record of the neoliberal, neoconservative establishment, I'm much more optimistic to see what the alternative has to offer. An alternative that focuses more on domestic issues, which unwinds us from these global obligations that have been dragging us down, costing American lives, costing American dollars, costing us years of our time and effort. Bold new policies like RFK Jr.'s fitness program, Trump's Freedom Cities initiative, Trump's initiative to beautify cities, these are all things that are exciting and promise a brighter future. Are they bold experimental policies? Of course, but they're definitely something worth trying and investing in. But given the choice between, experiment with these options or keep throwing money at Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, heck, I'll take the experimental policies. I'm willing to give them a try. At least that money is staying here, it's being invested here, and it's working toward making life better for Americans at home. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.